My name is Anna. I'm 37 years old, a single mom of 2 kids who mean the absolute world to me. I always thought that no matter what happened, your own parents would never turn their backs on their grandchildren. But just a few weeks before Thanksgiving, my mom called, her voice light, almost cheerful, and said, "This year it's just going to be an adults-only dinner, sweetheart." Before I could ask anything else, she added, "But Zachary's family and his 2 kids will still be coming. You know, they're better behaved and more appropriate." Have you ever had your own parents look you in the eye and say, "Your children aren't welcome"? That some grandkids get treated like royalty, while others are treated like a burden. If you've ever been compared, pushed aside, made to feel like an outsider in your own family, leave a comment below. Hit like if you believe love shouldn't come with conditions. And don't forget to subscribe, because what they did next went far beyond anything I ever imagined. After I hung up, I just stood there, frozen in my small kitchen. The late afternoon sun filtered through the window blinds and fell onto the table where my daughter had just scribbled snowflakes in crayon. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from that familiar cold rising up from somewhere deep inside me, the kind of ache I thought I had long learned to live with. I used to think I'd gotten used to being the outsider. But some wounds, once touched again, tear open like they were never healed. Zachary. That name never came with disappointment in our house. My mom used to call him the pride of the family, Dad's legacy, the example for the next generation. Me. I was the difficult one. Stubborn. Always doing things her way. I remember when I was 18, my dad suffered a major stroke. It left him partially paralyzed. My mom nearly fell apart. At the time, Zachary was preparing to attend Harvard on a partial scholarship, but the family still paid the rest, including all of his living expenses. Me. I had just gotten an acceptance letter from a local community college. I was encouraged to postpone school and stay home to take care of Dad and help Mom. I did it. No complaints. 3 years later, my dad passed away. I was by his bedside in his final moments, while Zachary flew in the day after the funeral. Mom hugged him and wept like the world had collapsed on his shoulders, while I sat alone in the kitchen, washing dishes left over from the memorial. From that point on, I kept telling myself, maybe I just need to try a little harder. Maybe if I proved I was worthy, she would finally see me. But nothing changed. Zachary got married, bought a 2-story house in the suburbs outside Charlotte, lush green lawn, a picture-perfect home. The down payment? My mom co-signed the bank loan. When I asked her why she took such a risk, she just smiled and said, "Zachary knows how to manage things. Don't worry about what doesn't concern you." I stayed quiet, but my chest felt like it was full of bricks. Then came the holidays. Mom's birthday? Celebrated at Zachary's house. Their anniversary? Also at Zachary's. Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter. Always at Zachary's with his beautiful wife, his well-behaved children, and a living room that looked like something out of a catalog. I still brought gifts, always on time. I carefully wrapped toys for the cousins, brought embroidered handkerchiefs for Mom, baked desserts myself. But nobody really noticed. Once Chloe, my daughter, asked me on the way home after Christmas dinner, "Mom, why didn't Grandma and Grandpa take a picture with me like they did with my cousins?" I couldn't answer. My throat closed, my chest tight as if something had squeezed the air out of me. I used to think I could endure it for my kids, because Chloe and Mason still smiled every time they saw their grandparents. Even though I knew that my mom's gaze only ever softened when it was directed at Zachary's kids. Even though I knew their Christmas presents were always cheaper. Smaller. So I kept going. For my children's joy. Until she told me Chloe and Mason were too wild, and didn't fit the tone of a traditional dinner. I broke. I had given up my youth to keep this household together while Zachary lived his Ivy League student life. I passed on my education, my career, my personal dreams, because this family needed me. And now the children I had poured my love and soul into were being excluded for not being calm enough? I remembered one spring a few years ago when Mason was still a toddler. Mom called and asked me to bring the kids over. When we arrived, the dining table was already set, with 3 sets of plates and silverware. One for Mom, one for Zachary, one for his wife. Nothing for me. Nothing for my kids. Did you forget to set extra places?" I asked gently. He shrugged. "The kids can eat later. This is adult time." I held Mason, who had dozed off hungry, on my shoulder, and watched Chloe sit on the rug, quietly chewing a dry cookie. I told myself I just have to try harder. I have to do better so she'll see I'm not worthless. I was wrong. I was wrong to believe that if I loved enough, sacrificed enough, I would finally be recognized. I was wrong to think that if I didn't speak up, if I didn't ask for anything, love would eventually come. But love, if it has to be begged for, can you still call it love? And when my mother casually excluded her own grandchildren from a family dinner because they're not like the others, I understood. I had spent my whole life chasing acceptance from people who never really wanted me there in the first place. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't jealous of Zachary or his children. I just felt cold. An emptiness like a winter wind, like the distance between me and my mother that never really closed. I walked into the living room. Chloe was taping a drawing of a cat to the window. Mason was folding scrap paper into paper airplanes. I looked at my children and my heart softened. They were my world. And I wouldn't let anyone, not even the woman who gave birth to me, make them feel like they weren't good enough. Not ever again. I thought that after that icy Thanksgiving call, my mom would go quiet. That maybe she'd take time to reflect on what she'd said, on how cruel it was to reject the grandchildren she once cradled in her arms. But just 3 days later, while I was picking Chloe and Mason up from school, my phone rang. It said, "Mom." I hesitated for a moment. Then I answered. Her voice wasn't sweet like usual. It was sharp, clipped, and full of irritation. "Anna, did you do something with the credit card?" she asked, skipping any sort of greeting. I blinked. "Which card?" "The one your father used to get gas this morning. It got declined. We couldn't check out at the grocery store." "What did you do?" I kept my hands steady on the wheel, trying to stay calm. "You mean the old Visa? That card is mine." There was a pause on the other end. Then she snapped. "Anna, I thought we agreed on this years ago. You said you'd add us to your card to help out when your dad was in the hospital." I remembered it clearly. 3 years ago, Dad had heart surgery. Neither of them could qualify for another line of credit. I hadn't hesitated to add them as authorized users. Thought just a few months. Just to get through a tough time. But time passed. I got caught up juggling work, the kids, and life. And they never brought it up again. Never asked to keep using the card. And I never checked back either. I took a deep breath. "Mom, that card is under my name. I forgot to remove you as an authorized user. But after last week's call, I don't see any reason to keep it going." Her voice rose. "What are you saying? You think we've been taking advantage of you?" I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart pounding. I opened my banking app and pulled up the transaction history. And then I froze. Month after month, there were large payments to high-end grocery stores, pharmacies, gas stations, even a furniture shop and a spa in Asheville. I scrolled back through previous months. $2,000. $3,000. Some months even over $4,000. "Mom," I said, my voice tight. "Do you even know how much you've spent? How long has it been since you paid a single bill yourself?" I had no idea this was going on. She exhaled sharply on the other end. "You make money, Anna. You live alone with no help. The least you could do is take care of your parents." "Take care of you?" I whispered. "What about me, Mom? When I dropped out of school to stay home and care for Dad, did you think about my future? When Chloe was born and my husband walked out, did you ask how I was surviving? When I worked 3 jobs just to keep this roof over our heads, did you ever offer a hand?" Silence. Then she answered slowly, "You're never grateful. We gave you life. Raised you. That card was just a small way for you to give something back." I let out a dry laugh. "So now love comes with a receipt?" She snapped. "If you won't fix things, the least you can do is not cause a scene. Cancel the card, fine. But you could have given us a heads up." "I'm not causing a scene. I'm just taking back control of my own finances." I emphasized every word. "And just so you know, I canceled the card this morning. I've also removed your access. From now on, all expenses stop." "Anna," she hissed, "don't forget I gave up everything for you." I paused. "No, Mom. You gave things up for the family image you wanted to protect. You sacrificed to save face with the neighbors. To brag about Zachary. And I was just the shadow you left in the corner." The line went dead. She had hung up. I sat in the car, motionless. Outside, Chloe was in the back seat, legs swinging as she looked out the window. Mason had fallen asleep, clutching his dinosaur backpack. The kids had no idea about the storm brewing inside me. I looked at the screen again. Total charges in the last 3 years. Over $82,000. Not a single thank you. Not a single check-in. I shut down the old credit card, opened a new account, and set up two-step verification on all my banking apps. I even called a lawyer I trusted to ask what I could do if they tried to access my financial info without permission again. When I stepped out of the car, a light rain had started to fall. Raindrops clung to my coat, but I didn't feel cold. For the first time in years, I stood tall. I had spent too long being the responsible one. The one called when the printer stopped working. The one asked to house sit. To co-sign a car loan. I was the life raft the family tossed around when they hit trouble, and reeled in when the waters calmed. But I wasn't anyone's life raft anymore. I was a mother. The only one who could protect Chloe and Mason from the kind of conditional love I grew up with. And I knew better than ever before, if I didn't stop it now, they would never stop. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. And I wasn't giving it back. The next morning, I had just finished making coffee and was prepping breakfast for the kids when my phone buzzed. Zachary's name flashed on the screen. I didn't pick up. Not out of anger, but because I already knew what the call would be about. A few seconds later, a text came through. Zachary, Anna, this is getting out of hand. Mom called me crying all night because you cut ties. I don't get why you're blowing this up. Our parents did everything for you. I stared at the message, a strange emotion rising in me. Not sadness. Not rage. Just exhaustion. I didn't want to explain anymore. I set the phone down and went back to pouring milk for Mason, slicing a few apples for Chloe to take to school. The kids were chatting about craft class and what they were going to draw today. Their voices grounded me, pulled me back to the present. A place where I was just mom to two little humans. Not the daughter constantly compared to Zachary. But Zachary didn't let up. That evening he called again. I answered. Anna. His voice came through before I even said hello. What are you doing? Canceling cards, ignoring messages, and now keeping the kids from seeing their grandparents. I leaned back in the kitchen chair, warm yellow light casting over my clenched hands. I'm not keeping them away. I just don't want them to think they have to endure mistreatment to be loved. Zachary scoffed, not amused, just bitter. You're being too sensitive. The kids don't even understand. Adults have their ways. You can't keep holding on to the past. I'm not holding on, Zach. I remember, I said, voice steady. And I've learned from it. He was quiet. I could picture him shaking his head, the same way he always did when I didn't follow his advice. Finally, he said, you're pushing everyone away. I hung up before I could let my resolve waver. The next day the mailman knocked. A cream-colored envelope landed in my hands. No sender listed, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Mom's. I hesitated before opening it. The paper smelled like old drawers, the shaky but neat lines familiar, just like the Christmas card she still wrote by hand. I began to read. Anna, I'm sorry if I made you upset. But you should understand that mothers don't always get it right. We just want what's best for our children. I once changed your diapers. I sat by your bed through fevers. I lost sleep worrying over you, missed meals because you wouldn't eat. And now you say I'm a terrible person. That I took advantage of you. How do you think that makes me feel? I'm not perfect. But you're not exactly the most thoughtful daughter either. You're angry because I love Zachary's kids more? You expect me to divide up love evenly? Isn't that selfish of you? Anyway, I hope you'll think it over. Mom. I folded the letter, my hand cold, but my eyes dry, strangely so. I'd heard that line many times before. I changed your diapers. As if the basic duty of raising me were a debt I'd owe forever, no matter how I was treated later. As if I didn't have the right to be hurt. As if I didn't have the right to say no. I used to let letters like that shake me. I used to think I was the one at fault. That I was being too harsh, too sensitive, too disloyal to my family. But not this time. I placed the letter in a kitchen drawer, didn't tear it up, didn't reply. Just left it there, a silent reminder that the gap between me and my blood family had long stopped being filled with love. It had been patched over with duty and guilt for far too long. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, the soft flicker of the TV casting shadows on the white walls. I thought about all the times I'd rushed over when Mom called, when Dad needed help with his meds, when Zachary was busy and I was more available. All the times I postponed my own plans, missed important meetings, even canceled vacations, to take care of them. No one ever asked if I was tired. No one ever noticed that maybe, just once, I wanted to be the one someone chose first. I realized I had spent far too long stuck in a cycle. Guilt, obligation, then sacrifice. And every time I tried to stand up for myself to say I deserved more too, they'd bring out the same old verdict. Your mother raised you. You were a burden. She's done enough. I glanced up at a photo sitting on the shelf. It was one I'd taken with Chloe and Mason last summer, at a berry farm in Blue Ridge. We were beaming, faces smudged with strawberry jam, eyes lit up. No one else was in that photo. I didn't feel like anyone was missing. Family isn't made by blood. It's built on kindness, on love that doesn't come with strings attached or a price tag. I sat there in my little home listening to the steady ticking of the clock and felt a little lighter. Not angry anymore. Just clear. I no longer belonged to that old system we used to call family. And I didn't need to. That Christmas Eve, snow came early. Tiny flakes drifted down onto the roof, blanketing the front steps in white, turning our home into a peaceful postcard scene. In the kitchen, the oven was humming with the warm scent of cinnamon cookies. Chloe sprinkled powdered sugar on a fresh batch while Mason focused on hanging the last ornaments on the small tree we had picked out together at the weekend farmers market. Liam carefully set mugs of hot chocolate on the table, quietly whistling, "Let it snow." The house felt soft, calm. No questions about where we were going, what we were wearing, or whether we were on time. Just us and the joy of simple moments. And I thought maybe this Christmas would finally be a quiet one. Then the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock. 7 p.m. Who would come by at this hour on such a cold night? Liam looked at me, concern in his eyes. I set my cup down and walked to the door, gently pulling the curtain aside. My heart sank. That Zachary. And a man I didn't recognize in a black coat, holding a leather document case. They stood on my porch like this was a regular holiday visit. I opened the door. The warm glow from inside lit up Mom's cold face. She smiled. A stiff, practiced smile. "Merry Christmas, Anna," she said, clutching her purse tightly in front of her. I didn't answer. My eyes went to the stranger beside her. He spoke, his voice calm and professional. "Anna Bennett? I'm Charles DeWitt, attorney representing Mr. and Mrs. Robert and Barbara Bennett. I'm here to deliver an official document." I froze. "An attorney?" Zachary stepped forward, his tone soft but firm. "We just want to talk. Don't make this into something it's not." I crossed my arms. "About what? About how you cut my kids out of the family? Or about how you secretly used my credit card for 3 years?" My mother frowned. "We're not here to argue, Anna. This is about the children." The man, Charles, handed me a cream-colored envelope. "This is a petition to enforce grandparent visitation rights under North Carolina law. My clients are requesting scheduled visits with Chloe and Mason to preserve their familial relationship." I took the papers, scanning the cold, typed lines. My heart pounded. "You're suing me for visitation rights?" I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. "This isn't a lawsuit," my father cut in. "It's just a reasonable request to maintain family bonds. The children shouldn't be cut off from their grandparents just because you're upset." I clenched the paper in my hand. "I'm upset? After everything Mom said to me? After she called Zachary's kids the good ones and said mine shouldn't even be around?" Charles spoke again, attempting to keep things civil. "My clients believe that your total refusal of contact is not in the children's best interests. There are also concerns regarding your history of postpartum depression, which could affect your parenting capacity." The cold outside didn't compare to the freeze running through my chest. I turned to Zachary. "Tell me, where did Mom get the idea that I'm unfit to be a mother?" He avoided my eyes, sighing. "You know you had treatment when Chloe was born. Mom just worries about the kids. She's afraid you might lose balance again." I almost laughed. When I went through postpartum depression, who was there for me? Who came to the hospital? Who brought me a meal? Or was all I got a judgmental stare and typical weak woman from my own mother? My mother said nothing. Then quietly she muttered, "You pushed everyone away. We didn't know how to help." I nodded slowly, still holding the paper, fingers ice cold. "And now, after pushing me to the sidelines for over a decade, After favoring one grandchild over another, after exploiting my finances and dismissing my love, you show up, with a lawyer, demanding the right to be grandparents? My father gritted his teeth. We raised you. Without us, where would you be now? I didn't respond right away. I looked each of them in the eye. There was no remorse. No regret. Just frustration that they no longer had control over me. I stood tall, my voice clear and unwavering. If you think you can use the law to force me to hand over my children to people who treated them like burdens, then go ahead. I'm ready. Zachary stepped in, pleading. Anna, don't blow this up. Just bring the kids by for a few hours. It doesn't have to be a war. I stared at him, ice in my tone. No, Zach. It's never been a small thing. This is my children's lives. And I won't let anyone, not even the people who raised me, touch them with another ounce of pretense. I stepped back and gently closed the door. Get out of my house. All of you. Charles looked at me, slightly hesitant. Are you refusing to receive the official document? I'm not refusing, I said, placing it on the table by the door. I'm just not signing anything. And if you think you'll win this legal game, be my guest. I slammed the door shut, my hand clenched, but I no longer trembled. On the other side, I could hear my mother calling my name, but I didn't open it again. Chloe and Mason came running downstairs. Chloe wrapped her arms around me from behind, her voice innocent. Mommy, who was that? I knelt down, hugging her tightly. No one important, sweetheart. Our Christmas is still waiting. I couldn't sleep that night. After closing the door on my parents and Zachary, I tidied up the living room, rearranged the chairs, and picked up the shards of the gift box they'd left behind like a final soft warning. Liam didn't ask anything. He just placed a cup of hot tea on the table, gently rested his hand on my shoulder, and quietly retreated to the bedroom. I sat alone under the dim light, next to the still twinkling Christmas tree, feeling not exactly sad anymore, but more like a storm had just passed. And then, when the kids had drifted into deep sleep, I decided to open the old file box in the basement. I knew that if my family was serious about taking things to court, I had to be prepared. I needed to find the papers and proof I'd stored away long ago, thinking I'd never need them. The gray box was covered in dust, tucked behind an old Christmas decoration bin. I pulled it out, placed it on the kitchen table, and opened the lid. Inside was a mess of documents from years past: the lease to my first apartment, hospital bills from Mason's birth, Chloe's preschool enrollment papers, and handwritten letters from my dad that I had once treasured. I wasn't expecting to find anything useful. But then my eyes landed on a yellow envelope, carefully clipped behind a folder. No name, no stamp. Just a handwritten line: Anna, open only when needed. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my dad's. My hands trembled as I picked up the envelope. I pulled out the paper, aged and slightly yellowed, the ink blurred in some spots. But I could still read every line clearly. Anna, if you're reading this letter, things likely aren't as simple as I had hoped. I'm not a perfect man. I know I didn't stand up for you enough when your mother and Zachary hurt you. I was afraid of conflict, afraid of tearing the family apart, and because of that, I stayed silent. But I never didn't see you. I saw you quietly doing the dishes after family dinners with no thanks. I saw you step back so Zachary could shine, even though you deserved to be seen too. I saw your eyes when your mother praised Zachary's kids but never looked at yours the same way. And it hurt. I created a small trust account in your name, built from my leftover retirement bonus and some stock shares I kept hidden from your mother. I didn't want her to know because I knew she'd try to control it. If the day comes when you truly need to stand on your own, use it. Not for revenge, but to stay grounded. And if you can, forgive me. Dad, Robert Bennett. I couldn't hold back the tears. Not out of regret, but because finally, someone had seen me. Even though he'd been gone nearly 10 years, that letter was the first thing that made me feel like I had a footing, like I wasn't completely alone in this fight. I sat motionless for a long time, still clutching the letter. Then I stood up and opened my laptop. I started searching for information about the trust. It took me nearly an hour to trace the lead to a small asset management firm in Raleigh where my dad had worked part-time after retirement. I called, my voice slightly shaky as I gave my name. The receptionist transferred me to a manager named Marcus. And when I mentioned my father's name, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mr. Robert did leave a trust file, and yes, it's in your name, Marcus said after a few minutes of searching. And according to the terms, the account is still active. No withdrawal or alteration requests have ever been made. It's secured at an internal access level with no co-owners. I could barely believe what I was hearing. Can you tell me the current value? Estimated at around $172,000, not including dividends currently reinvesting. I gripped the edge of the table, speechless. Not because of the money, but because of what it meant. My dad hadn't said anything. He had just prepared. Quietly. Patiently. Placing a silent trust in the daughter the whole family had always labeled as unstable. I texted Liam right after. I want to see a lawyer tomorrow. I'm ready. The next morning, I sat in the office of a family law attorney named Natalie Crane, recommended by a close friend. Natalie was a woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a voice as calm as it was commanding. I told her everything, from Thanksgiving, the credit card, to Christmas night with the grandparent visitation petition. Natalie didn't interrupt. When I finished, she opened a file and tapped her fingers gently on the desk. They don't have grounds, she said slowly. Especially if you can show financial exploitation, clear emotional favoritism, and most importantly, a lack of prior meaningful relationship. I nodded. I have proof. Messages, receipts, even a voice recording of my mother saying my kids were too loud to be at the same dinner table. Natalie smiled. Good. We won't react. We'll defend, and defend well. I left her office with a new stack of documents, the late afternoon sun lighting my face as I stepped outside. I felt in control. Not because I wanted to fight, but because I was done living passively. And from that moment on, I knew this battle they had started would no longer be a shadow game. This time it would be in the open. And I wasn't alone. The mediation took place on a freezing Wednesday morning in early January, in a small conference room at the county courthouse, surrounded by 4 light gray painted walls and a long wooden table at the center. Across from me sat my mother, father, Zachary, and their representing attorney, Mr. Charles DeWitt. I arrived with my lawyer, Mrs. Natalie Crane. I dressed simply, a dark turtleneck sweater, my hair neatly tied back, no elaborate makeup. I wanted to appear steady, not rigid but not fragile either. My mother wore the same dress she usually chose for church holidays, her old pearl earrings catching the glow of the fluorescent lights. I saw her blinking repeatedly, then looking down when my gaze passed over her. The court-appointed mediator was a quiet-spoken middle-aged woman with a calm voice and sharp eyes. After a brief introduction, she invited the petitioner's side to present their reasons for the request. Charles opened his folder and spoke with the poised tone of a lecturer. He listed the close bond between the grandparents and grandchildren since early childhood, the abruptness of the severed contact, the potential emotional harm caused by emotional distancing, and concerns about the mother's, my, mental stability. My mother added a line, voice trembling, clearly rehearsed in front of a mirror. I don't understand why my daughter is being so cold. I changed her diapers. I held her during her fevers. I never thought I'd live to see the day I'd have to beg to see my grandkids. I said nothing. Natalie gently placed her hand on my wrist under the table like a reminder. Not yet. Then it was our turn. Natalie opened our file, laying out a set of documents across the table. Each paper was officially stamped, every transaction line highlighted. Your Honor, she began, my client does not deny receiving help from her parents in childhood. But there is no statute in law that permits someone to exploit that as justification to intrude upon a grown mother's right to raise her children and manage her private life. Charles sat up straighter, frowning, but Natalie didn't slow down. We present the following to this mediation. Credit card statements showing my client's parents spent an average of more than $2,800 per month, over the course of 3 years from her account, without clear authorization. A series of text messages requesting cash for everything from medication to car repairs to personal shopping. And this, she paused, pulled out a phone and connected it to a small Bluetooth speaker she brought along, is a recording of a phone call between my client and her mother, dated November 15th. The room went still. Then my mother's voice rang out from the speaker, slightly sharp through the external audio. Anna, don't nitpick like that. Zachary's kids are well-behaved, respectful, not loud like your two. They're the kind of grandkids anyone would be proud of. Yours. Honestly, they're better left at home. When the recording ended, I didn't look at my mother. I looked straight at Zachary. His eyes dropped. His hand gripped the edge of the table. The mediator nodded, turning to Charles. Does the petitioner have any response to these documents and the recording? Charles looked flustered, opened his mouth as if to speak, then stopped. My mother whispered, "That's edited, it can't be used as evidence." Natalie calmly replied, "The recording is unaltered and was lawfully recorded in the state of North Carolina, which does not require two-party consent. We can provide the full original file if necessary." Silence stretched through the room. Zachary looked up, voice low. "Anna, are you really going to take this all the way? This is family. You're breaking everything apart." I replied evenly, not raising my voice, not angry, just stating a truth. "You say I'm breaking things apart. But if you were the one called not good enough, if you were told to leave your kids at home so the real family could have dinner, if your credit card was used without your consent, would you still call that family bonding?" Zachary didn't answer. Charles stood, glanced at my mother, then turned to the mediator. "We request a private internal discussion, 15 minutes. The mediator nodded. "Very well. I'll wait outside." Everyone left the room. I stayed seated with Natalie, who looked at me as if asking, "Ready?" I nodded. I didn't know what they were discussing out there. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't here to compromise, I wasn't here for validation, and I definitely wasn't here to play small. I was here to draw a boundary. And I knew exactly which side of it I stood on. One afternoon in mid-January, as the snow began to melt and the roads around our neighborhood turned to slush, I had just put Mason down for a nap when the doorbell rang. I walked over, opened the door, and saw Zachary standing on the porch, empty-handed, his coat speckled with wet spots from thawing ice. I said nothing. He didn't wait to be invited in, just asked softly, "Do you have a minute?" I tilted my head. "If you're here to pass a message from Mom and Dad, don't bother." He shook his head, eyes meeting mine. "No. I'm here because I need to talk to you. Really talk. For the first time." I still hesitated. Zachary lowered his voice a bit more. "You don't owe me anything. I know you probably don't even want to see me, but please, just let me say what I need to, then I'll go." I stepped back and opened the door. He walked in like a stranger into a house that used to be part of both our memories. We sat across from each other in the living room. The afternoon light faded beyond the windows. I poured myself a cup of tea without asking if he wanted any. Zachary sat upright, hands clasped, elbows on his knees as if he were holding something back. "You think I'm selfish," he began. "And I have been for a very long time." I didn't react. He continued, "When we were kids, everything seemed to come easily to me. I thought it was because I was good, because I worked hard. But as I got older, I started realizing, some people don't have to work for it. They just get chosen. And you were never one of the chosen." He looked up at me. "I heard what Mom said about visiting the kids. I heard the recording. I can't defend it." I nodded slightly. "And yet you still stood by them during mediation." "Because I was still stuck in the role of the good son, Anna," he said with a bitter smile. "Even when Mom was wrong, I kept thinking that if I just did the right thing, everything would smooth over. But after that night, after Mom called me crying in the middle of the night, not because she missed you but because she was embarrassed in front of the neighbors, that's when I realized, what they fear isn't losing their child. It's losing control." I set my teacup down. "So why are you here?" He took a deep breath, then pulled a worn, tri-folded piece of paper from his coat pocket and placed it on the table in front of me. "This is a copy of the will Mom gave me 3 years ago," he said slowly. "Back then she told me it was just a draft. But after the mediation I found it again in her files. Exactly the same." I unfolded the paper. The first line was clear. "All real estate, financial assets, land titles and accumulated property under the names of Mr. Robert Bennett and Mrs. Barbara Bennett are to be transferred in full to Zachary Bennett." Below that a short note read, "Daughter Anna Bennett is not included in the distribution for private reasons as determined by the family." I wasn't shocked. But there was a sharp ache in my chest, like some part of me had still hoped I was wrong. Zachary looked at me, his eyes truly sorrowful. "At the time I signed an acknowledgement form. I thought it was just so they could handle the paperwork more easily. I didn't know, or maybe I didn't want to see clearly. I folded the paper and placed it back on the table. Well, now you know. So what? He straightened up, his eyes steadier than before. I'm not siding with them anymore. If they want to take this to court, I won't support it. If they ask for anything from me, I'll refuse. I know this doesn't erase what I did, what I didn't do, how I let you down. But I won't help them anymore. I looked at him for a while. There was something in his voice, not begging for forgiveness but owning the truth. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he went on. And maybe you'll never want to hear another word from me again. But if one day you need someone in your corner, I won't disappear this time. I leaned back in the chair, eyes drifting to the window, where the last patches of snow were melting slowly on the porch roof. I didn't answer right away. I hadn't forgotten the birthdays I spent alone in the kitchen baking my own cake while he and Mom laughed upstairs about Zachary making the honor society. I hadn't forgotten being cropped out of family photos because your hair wasn't brushed yet. And I hadn't forgotten his eyes on Thanksgiving, when I stood silently in the doorway and he walked past with a tray of wine without even looking at me. But I also wasn't blind to one thing. If someone in this family had the courage to step outside the old pattern, maybe that was something. Thank you, I said softly. No more, no less. Zachary nodded. He stood up, no handshake, no hug. We didn't need ceremony. He just said one last thing. You have every right to claim what should have been yours all along, Anna. And I won't stand in your way. The door closed behind him. I sat there a long while, my hands still resting on the folded paper. Something had shifted inside me. Not trust. A boundary. And I knew from that moment on this family had started to break open in a new direction. The official hearing took place on a Monday at the end of February. The air was cold, the wind dry, and the sky hung heavy and gray, like it carried the weight of all those tense, silent months. I arrived nearly 30 minutes early. Natalie, my lawyer, walked beside me calmly, carrying a thick file marked with dozens of pale yellow sticky notes. Wake County Court was small but tidy. The main hall was quiet, the familiar scent of old wood and paper blending with the smell of coffee from the service kiosk just outside. I sat in the waiting area, steady but with a heartbeat like a drum roll for something larger than myself. Across the room, my parents arrived with Charles DeWitt. Mom wore a long, dark brown wool coat, her head bowed, but her eyes darting around like she hoped to spot someone she knew, someone who might ask why she was here. Dad walked behind her, looking more composed, but his face was stone. Zachary didn't show. Natalie leaned in and asked softly, "Are you ready?" I nodded. "I'm ready." We entered the small courtroom. The judge was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair neatly pinned back, her voice calm but unshakable. She introduced the parties, confirmed the purpose of the hearing, and invited the petitioners to present their case. Charles stood, delivering his statement with professional poise. He emphasized the lack of connection between the grandparents and the grandchildren, the right to maintain strong family bonds, and concerns about the children's environment given that their mother had previously experienced depression and a history of emotional distress. My mother sat beside him, dabbing at her eyes now and then with a tissue, as if struggling to contain her sorrow. Occasionally, she shook her head softly whenever Charles pointed out my cold and unfilial treatment toward her own parents. I didn't react. I just waited. Then it was Natalie's turn. She rose with quiet confidence, opened the file carefully, and began her statement in a voice as soft as it was sharp. "Your Honor," she said, "we do not deny that the petitioners once cared for and loved their daughter. But this is not a trial of vague memories. This is where we determine whether the individuals demanding access to these children are truly acting in the best interest of those children, or for something else entirely." Then she presented each section one by one. Financial evidence. Over $80,000 in charges on my credit card across 3 years without clear authorization, along with text messages from my mother pressuring me with lines like, "I raised you, so you owe me." Evidence of discriminatory behavior. An email from my mother about Thanksgiving and a voice recording calling my kids loud and disrespectful, while referring to Zachary's child as a real grandchild. Psychological expert notes. Confirming I had no remaining symptoms of postpartum depression for years and was now living a stable, healthy, and positive life. A handwritten letter from my late father, Not admissible as primary legal evidence, but allowed as a supporting document to reflect family context. When the recording played in court, my mother's voice rang out again, clear as ever. Zachary's kids are different. They're obedient, easy to manage. Yours. Honestly, they're not the kind you let sit at the adult table. My mother went pale. My father stared straight ahead, showing no emotion. When Natalie finished speaking, she turned and looked at me. I knew it was my turn. I stood, hands steady, eyes up. Your Honor, I began, I'm not perfect. But I'm a mother. I know what's best for my children. I once hoped my parents would love my kids the way I once loved them. But the truth is, I grew up in a household where the rules changed depending on who you were. And I cannot let that same pattern repeat with Chloe and Mason. I took a deep breath and continued. This is not revenge. This is protection. And I believe any mother standing in my shoes would make the same choice. The courtroom fell into a long silence. Finally, the judge lowered her head to review the file, then spoke. After thoroughly reviewing the evidence presented by both sides, including financial records, audio recordings, and an independent expert evaluation, I conclude that the petitioner's request does not meet the legal standards for grandparent visitation rights in this case. I heard every word like stones dropping out of my chest. Furthermore, the judge added, the court formally warns the petitioners of conduct indicating misuse of legal rights to exert emotional pressure, financial manipulation, and potentially destabilize the well-being of the children. Any further attempts at harassment or unjust interference in the defendant's and her children's lives will be met with stricter legal consequences. My mother said nothing. But I saw her grip her purse tighter, her face colorless. Charles bowed his head slightly as if accepting defeat in a professional sense. I stood as the judge declared the hearing adjourned. Walking out, I caught the eyes of someone familiar. Mindy, one of my mother's friends who once called me a troubled child when I was 16. She looked at me, then turned away without a word. Maybe they'd heard the story. Maybe everyone in the neighborhood knew by now. But I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't crave to be understood anymore. All I felt was light. As light as the early spring breeze sweeping through the street as I opened my car door. Natalie placed a hand on my shoulder and smiled gently. You did it, Anna. I didn't say anything. I just looked out the window where the sun was finally peeking through after weeks of gray, and I knew that I had the right to walk forward without lowering my head. I never thought spring could feel this peaceful. Not because the cold was gone or because the buds were starting to peek out on the bare branches behind the house, but because I was living without bracing myself to hold on to things that were never truly mine. Chloe and Mason were playing tag on the soft green grass at a lakeside campground near Kerr Lake. Their laughter rang through the open space, mingling with the chirping birds and the faint scent of wildflowers. I was sitting on a blanket spread across the lawn with 4 other mothers, all single moms I'd met through a community support group after my divorce. We shared snacks, laughed over tense parent-teacher meetings, stories of spilled milk on homework, and kids faking fevers to skip school. No one asked about my biological family, about my parents, or the legal drama that had popped up in local papers. Here I was simply myself. A mom, a woman who could laugh, love, and no longer carry the shame of being not enough. I was pouring lemonade when my phone chimed with a new email from Natalie. I opened it and my heart didn't race the way it used to. Anna, we have just received official notice from Mrs. Barbara Bennett's legal representative. She has withdrawn all legal requests related to visitation rights and confirms she will not pursue any further legal action. The original copy will be sent to your home address this week. Warmly, Natalie. I read it once. Then again. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I wanted to feel every word clearly. Gently. Definitively. Holding the phone in my hand, I looked up and saw Mason trying to climb a small mound while Chloe reached out to pull her little brother up. Neither of them knew what had just ended. And I wanted to keep it that way. I set the phone down without replying to Natalie. I pulled out a small notepad from my backpack, the one where I'd written down the kids' little sayings I wanted to keep forever. The first page held something Chloe had written when she was 6, in wobbly handwriting. Mom is an umbrella with feet. I asked her back then why she called me that. And Chloe said, because when it rains you cover us. But you also know how to walk. I didn't say anything. I just smiled. But I remember how my heart melted when I heard her say it. A little while later, when they'd had enough playtime, they came running toward me, their faces flushed from the sun and excitement. "Mom, can we really sleep in a tent?" Mason asked, eyes wide. "Tonight you get to sleep right on the ground in your dinosaur sleeping bag," I said, ruffling his hair. "What do you think?" Chloe jumped up. "I want to sleep next to you. Only if you both finish your grilled sandwiches tonight," I teased, and they screamed with excitement and dashed off before I could repeat myself. Sitting alone again, I took out the envelope Natalie had sent earlier, the first letter my mother had her lawyer send after the hearing. The one I had never opened. I hadn't planned to read it. But today, in this light and easy air, I felt calm enough to know it couldn't hurt me anymore. I tore the envelope open. Inside was a typed letter, cold in tone, with a section that read, "Barbara Bennett, through legal representation, officially withdraws all claims related to access to the minor children Chloe Bennett and Mason Bennett. She acknowledges that prior legal actions have caused damage to family relationships and will not initiate any further legal procedures in the future." No apology. No admission of wrongdoing. Just a technical ending by the letter of the law. I folded the paper in half, then again, and dropped it into the trash bag under the picnic table. My hands were clean, but my heart was even cleaner. Someone once told me that forgiveness isn't about making peace. It's about letting go of the idea that the past could have been different. And I think I've done that. Chloe came running over and hugged me from behind. "Mom, Mason says you're a superhero in a t-shirt." I laughed and pulled her into my lap. "Do I get a cape?" Chloe nodded. "That jacket you tie around your waist. But you're stronger than real superheroes. Because you didn't have to fly, you still got us far away from the bad people." I didn't ask who she was thinking of. I just held her tighter, then looked out toward the horizon, where the setting sun cast a warm glow across the silver-speckled lake. There was a time I thought I had to prove something to my family. That I mattered. That I could succeed, sacrifice, do the right thing. But now I understand, I don't need to prove anything anymore. I just need to live. And living is enough. Maybe each of us at some point in our lives has asked ourselves, am I doing this out of love, or out of fear of being abandoned? I'm not telling this story to blame or accuse anyone. I'm telling it so that someone out there, tired under the weight of invisible expectations, can know, you don't have to strain just to be worthy of love. You don't have to sacrifice your entire self to hold on to a home where you've always been left outside the door. What do you think about my story? Have you ever had to let go of a relationship because it hurt you too many times? If you have, I'd truly love to hear your story in the comments below. Because sometimes, the loneliest experiences are exactly where we find the deepest connection. And if you're drawn to honest, heartfelt stories about family life and the long road to healing, make sure to follow this channel so you won't miss the next chapter. Because who knows, the story that's coming next might be the one you need to hear most today.